Not my original intention to record this today, and I also meant to put it on the normal tier list, but stuff happened, and I'm having to make a video with not a lot of time left. But I want to talk about specifically the mini games in Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2. If you notice, the white backgrounds are the ones from, Stadium 2, and the ones without one are Stadium 1. And I even named all of them the correct name because half these were, for some reason, named incorrectly. If I have a space, it's because I'm yawning. I'm very tired. This hour 40 I've been up. Not a very good time, but overall, I have a lot of opinions on Stadium minigames. They're probably one of the main reasons you'll pick up and play Stadium nowadays, because while the battle simulation part is a challenge, it's also kind of boring for a lot of people, so it relies a lot on, just the classic. I do notice that I don't have a D tier, which is a little weird because I thought I did, but we'll ignore it and just act like it's D tier because honestly, I'm putting the ones that I think are bad here, and we're gonna go from bottom to top. So the very first minigame that comes to mind when I think of a bad minigame in one, execution, and two, fun factor, I think of Snore War. I think Snore War is one of the more miserable games to actually exist in the minigame lineup. Uh, it's almost in its own tier with how bad it is. The other ones we'll talk about are they kind of just don't function as you would want, but Snore War functions. It just doesn't function well, and it's boring. And if you're against human players, it's like a sense of timing that you either have a rhythm and you win, or you go on for a long time and eventually get forced to lose because of how fast it goes. My biggest problem ultimately with this is the very specific A press that's required. It's very fast, and in my opinion, there's a certain point where, as a human versus the CPU, where you're just mashing and you're hoping that you're on the right path. Otherwise, it's very, very lackluster. Next, we're gonna go to actually a Stadium 2, which I didn't think I would put Stadium 2 this low, and we'll talk about why this is a really weird pick in my opinion. But we're gonna talk about Pichu's power plant. Now, if you look at wherever Thundering Dynamo is, they're basically the same game, except one's in Stadium 2, one's in Stadium 1, and you're supposed to mash for charge, which we'll talk about Thundering Dynamo when we get to it. My problem with Pichu's power plant is you're also supposed to pick the specific direction that you are supposed to mash for power. The problem, that direction doesn't work. I don't know if it's the N64 controllers I've always used, which that's like over 100 different controllers at this point, or if it's just the minigame itself. I have a huge problem with not the mashing part, but the direction sometimes just cuts off early, doesn't read my input, and my favorite, it will do the opposite direction, which I don't know how that's actually a possibility for a mini game like this. So it comes down to not this being bad as a mini game concept, and we'll talk about the other good example of it, but just because it doesn't work, which also goes into the next one, which is Rock Harden. Rock Harden has this huge problem where, for some reason, if you are just too good on the mini game and you play as close as you can to perfect, you can still just get hit. It's a really weird thing that happens with Rock Harden. I've literally gone frame by frame in a recording before and seen that certain CPUs and humans, when they activate Harden, they will still get hit and lose the energy because the game is just okay, we're just gonna do this. And it starts to change the frame rulings on it. It's very weird and just lackluster of a choice for a minigame. And I understand there's technically an activation period for Harden in this, but it's supposed to be on point when you harden and quickly go off so you can save and conserve your energy, which is the problem here because if there's an activation window, it throws off one, your timing, and two, the point of the minigame. What the hell's the point? Which goes into the last one, which also kind of just doesn't work, and that's Magikarp Splash. Now, the reason I put this actually in F tier, it's actually a fine game. It's just boring. It's really boring. The jumping takes a bit to get used to, but once you do, it's just there. I don't think I've really ever met anybody that really likes this game. Now, with every other game, like there's some weirdo that likes Snore War. Pichu's Power Plant is just mashing, so some people like it. And Rock Garden is actually some people's personal favorite, and that's perfectly fine. Magikarp Splash, I think a lot of people just don't like it because of how whack the jump is, which is, fair in my opinion. Next, we're going to go into C tier finally. We're finally getting out of what I consider the bad games and go into the mid to mid, basically. Though I can't. Oh, there it is. There's Dig Dig Dig. So basically, Sandshrew has to dig to find water. Weird that you're making a ground type ground itself. But ignoring that, you mash with LNR, and that's basically it. It's a really, in my opinion, poor mashing game. I feel like you could have done something with like Z instead. R and C would have been more interesting. But ignoring that, sorry, there was like something in my throat. It's just a fine game. I don't think it does anything wrong, which is also for Frolic. Now, this has a problem to do with merely the hitboxes being really whack. And also, I find this game incredibly easy against CPU, but with humans, it becomes like. It basically becomes we're going to play a patient game for the later points. And I just think the last 10 seconds of the game matter way more than the rest. So it's just kind of a waiting game to really care. Which is why, even though I do like the game, I do think it's actually really cool. I just think the point system is really stupid. Which goes into one game I've never really liked, but a lot of people really enjoy for some reason, is Streaming Stampede. You're supposed to count with presses and be able to like determine how many certain Pokemon, or the final one just total amount. My biggest problem with this is one, is long and boring, and two, I don't really think it's that hard to count. There's some really interesting, like, it's usually like the second or third round, I think it is. It's probably the second round that I'm thinking of, where they'll try and hide Pokemon in really weird ways. But unless you're like 15 feet away from the TV, I don't see how it's that interesting. And then probably the most neutral minigame in all of Pokemon Stadium is Egg Emergency. There's like 3 patterns basically for every difficulty, I think, or maybe it's the same 3 patterns for all difficulties, but it's a pattern. That's all it is. It's not very hard. I guess you can mess up, but in general, it's a pretty easy thing to get down. Finally, we go into B rank, which I think is the start of the good games, or at least ones that when they come up, you're like, okay, I am willing to play. Which, only 8 games in what I would consider the I don't want to play right now tier. But I'm also trying to find, there it is, Thunder and Dynamo. Difference between Pichu's Power Plant is that this mashing is kind of on point. I do want to state for the record, technically there is an issue with this where depending on your freaking monitor or TV setup, you can actually not be able to finish the highest difficulty because you just can't react to it. It's really whack. And I didn't know it was a thing until I ran into it a couple years ago on my N64 setup. And I looked it up, and I was actually amazed by that. It's really whack. Next one is not really down here because it deserves to be based on the game, but it has a lot to do with the controller that you use it on. That is Ekans Who Pearl. I actually really like this game. It's a lot of like strategy. It's a lot of going for risks. The time of the throw is really depending on whether you want to go for the big points. Honestly, this is a really, really well-designed mini game, except the controller. The controller itself is fine, but it's one of the few things on the N64 that has you hold the left and center, which is a really odd combination. And at the same time, the control stick to throw, for some reason, is very, like, super sensitive. It's sensitive to the point where I think it's ultimately very frustrating to succeed against the harder difficulty. I do think it's a fun game. I just think without the fairness factor of 4 normal controllers, The CPU has the advantage, or whoever has the best controller has the advantage, which I don't think is that great. The next one I think is pretty cool is Clear Cut. I used to love this game a lot. It's a lot of timing, but I do think there's a lot of waiting periods, and there's a big problem with this one in general where I feel like it's harder depending on your setup than it should be because of the way like the log like moves. It's really hard for me to like say was issue, but it's like a refresh rate problem. Even though it's not, it's just it looks very weird on some setups, which makes it harder for timing. I'm actually pretty good at the minigame itself, but it's just a showcase that even though while I am good at this one of all things, I don't think it's necessarily great. Uh, Next one is actually would be a lot higher if it wasn't due to a certain aspect of the game. Here, Eevee is basically this version of musical chairs. It's all about timing and waiting for the little wooden barricade or cover to go up, and you collect fruit. Now, that's really cool and all. It's a reaction game. It's very basic, and it has a little fun twist to it, where you can get punished if it does a fake out and you get hit. My only issue with this game, and why it's not an A tier specifically, is because Pineco is this punishment in it, which I don't think needs to actually exist. There's already a punishment for being tricked by a fake out and going early, where you won't be able to more likely react for that round. If you react instantly doing a good job, you are punished by a Pineco for the next round. Not only do you not get points for that round, but you don't get points for the next one, which I feel is way too punishing, and it's what, eliminates it here. Next is Tumbling Togepi. This one is just more of an obstacle course. I do think it's kind of fun when you're playing with a bunch of people that haven't played a lot of video games. I think it's probably one of the best cases for, like, if you were to give a random person that who hasn't played a lot of video games just like 10 things in video games, I feel like Tumbling Togepi is a very good showcase of just how how to play. It's really weird because I don't think it's necessarily great for a lot of people that love the mini games, and of the racing style it's definitely the weakest, but I do think it's a good fun time. It's not bad, which goes and finishes up B tier, which I mean that's pretty good. We have 5 games that are here, and we're gonna go into Clefairy Says immediately. This had to be kind of the bottom here, mostly because it's just Simon Says with button combinations. I do think it's done in a very cute way and very fair. Everybody's gonna mess up in a weird way, and I feel like it's a cool showcase of Simon Says with Clefairy Says. It's actually really cute. I just realized something. Yeah, okay. I was like, I thought I was missing this icon. Gutsy Golbat would be a lot higher if it wasn't so dang frustrating against CPUs. I'm focusing much more on the player versus player aspect a lot of the time, but this CPU garbage is really annoying. And so it's going to bring it down a little bit. It would probably just be the best in A tier versus S tier, but it's still brought down because the CPUs are goddamn annoying. Somehow they are able to just tap you and steal all your hearts, versus you who has to go on full tackle and somehow miss and get electrocuted, and then you're also hit again and lose all your hearts. I think this is just very unbalanced in the CPU's favor. For humans, though, it's a very fun game. I think it's really cool. Next, we have a mash slash combo obstacle course. I think Run Rattata Run is really fun. The mashing with, of course, the timing over the barricades is one of the best cases of just the combo. I think it has a really cool flow, and at the same time, it's very simple and very quick to get used to. Which also goes into Topsy Turvy, where while it has a little higher curve than just mashing and pressing a button every so often, this feels like one of the best, like, I don't want to say timing games because it kind of is, but also at the same time, like, it's very action oriented, which is kind of rare for a Pokemon Stadium minigame. But overall, It is a cool showcase of timing, and I think these can get really competitive. I do wish the timer was a little different in time. Like, I wish it was a little longer. Next, we go into probably the final in A tier. Yeah, it is the final. We have Barrier Ball. The only reason this is straight up in A tier versus S tier is because of how hard it is to hit certain sections depending on which way you're facing. It's a little weird of an explanation if you haven't played this game, but basically you are at four different angles. So if you're playing four players, it's cool, except one side will always have a hard time hitting another side specifically, and it just becomes very annoying if one player gets a good score because they only really have to guard against two that much. It's not that's the biggest limitation. Otherwise, it's a really cool showcase of Pong. Next, we have Delibird's Delivery. The only reason it's in bottom of S tier versus top is while there's a lot of strategy involved, there's a lot of comboing, there's a lot of just in general. There is a really annoying RNG case where you pick up an item, and for some reason, the items can spawn fast enough to where you insta pick up, and I think that's very annoying. But otherwise, I think it's a really great minigame, which goes into Sushi Go Round, which doesn't have that problem. It's just pure points, pure combo versus the really expensive sushi. I think is really fun. It's the best one in Stadium 1 by a long shot. And whenever people talk about the best minigame, they usually mention this one. I'm a little different in that I think Rampage Rollout is probably the best. Can we put it? Thank you. Is the best minigame. I think there's a lot of strategy, and I do like the generic kind of racetrack vibe that goes with it. Now, ultimately, when I was deciding what to go in S tier, I had to look at it from a perspective of not only what I think is really fun, but what I think is easy to understand and get going. I think the score multipliers are very basic, and you can kind of go in with a normal look at it and understand really quickly. Plus, there's an RNG factor that always makes it feel fair. A lot of these mini games, if you're just good at these mini games or you've been playing for a long time, when you get random people, it's not as fun. Versus Delibird Delivery and Sushi Go Round, I think the RNG factor is really, really good. It's a little annoying in Delibird sometimes, but when it comes down to it, you can figure out combos, you can figure out good, just like setups, and I think even if you're new, you still have a chance to make a win. Rampage Rollout, the only reason it's up here is because I think it's the best racing, I think it's the best action minigame, and at the same time, while there is a comeback mechanic, I do think you can figure out how to use the speed boost and ultimately kind of shut out your opponent if you're good enough. But if you are on the same playing field, the kind of comeback mechanic works really well. I do think it is one of the better showcases of a comeback mechanic in a racing like setting, which is weird for a mini game, right? Because like usually it's one of the biggest struggle for biggest racing games, whereas the mini game here seems to have found a great balance. So how I would order or call these tiers is basically F tier in this case are mini games I really don't want to ever play. Whenever they come up, I get very frustrated or I just don't really enjoy it. C is I can deal with it, like if they come up, but I'm not very excited, so to say. B tier is like, I wouldn't mind it. Like they come up and I'm gonna enjoy myself. They're fun and they're cool competition. Whereas A tier and S tier, A tier is like ones I usually want to play, whereas S tier are my go-tos. If I turn on the game for Pokemon Stadium 2, I usually play a game of Rampage Rollout. If I go to Stadium 1, I usually play Sushi Go Round. I also play Topsy Turvy, but that's just me. I love Topsy Turvy since childhood, nostalgia. And yeah, that's my list. Overall, I think it's a good showcase of kind of the balancing act that the stadium minigames go to. I understand some of these are a little lower than a lot of people would have, and some of these are way higher. But hey, it's my personal tier list. I think some of these are in the perfect spot. But what is your least favorite and favorite stadium minigame from Stadium 1 or 2? Pick whichever one you prefer. Now, I will say, if you don't say Rampage Rollout is the best one, you're just wrong. So yeah, next time.